Now, it's AM 650's The Law Show, a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Good morning and welcome to The Law Show, and welcome to June for that matter. Nice to have you with us as we have a couple of guests from Murphy Batista LLP in studio. It's a pleasure to welcome back Scott Stanley and to welcome for the first time Diana Robertson. Good morning, you two.
Morning, Sterling.
Good morning.
Diana, congratulations.
Thank
We're
you.
going to skip past Scott because we've heard from him in the past, and we'll get back to Scott. But Diana is a freshly minted lawyer. They don't come any fresher than Diana, who just had her graduation ceremony, Friday afternoon?
That's right.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So now you tell us about what brought you to the law, because you are an older student. I think that's a reasonably safe thing to say.
I would say that's reasonably accurate.
Most of your peer group graduating would be younger than you, but you came to the law from an interesting background where you had to work with lawyers and with ICBC as an occupational therapist, Diana, for years. So take us back to those days and what eventually got you out of being a very accomplished occupational therapist to being a lawyer.
Well, it's a really long story, but I'll try to abbreviate it a bit for you, Sterling. I graduated back in 1992 from U of A. Started working as an occupational therapist, and soon after that moved to British Columbia and started working in the Okanagan. I did a lot of work during that period of time for ICBC rehab, for lawyers, for insurance companies, for WCB. So a variety of kind of work, but most of it was clinical practice where I was treating people who'd been injured or had illnesses.
And so you would end up working from time to time with personal injury lawyers like Scott Stanley and his colleagues at Murphy Batista.
That's right, and that's actually how I initially met Scott.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
And did some work on some files for Murphy Batista back when I was in the Okanagan. And so back then I worked on what we'd call complex injury files. And as a clinician, I found it really interesting and really rewarding, and I actually really enjoyed working with the lawyers. And I guess I had some envy of what they were able to do, because as a clinician, as an occupational therapist, we're being asked to evaluate people and arrange and provide rehab for individuals with complex needs. But I was finding that sometimes in dealing with the insurance companies, ICBC and other insurers who are retaining the therapist, they weren't necessarily receptive to the recommendations that clinicians have. So sometimes
you would go to ICBC and say and say this patient needs
this.
They need this,
Yes.
And the insurer, in this case ICBC, would say, well, we don't have no provisions to accommodate that need, so move on. And what, just shut you down?
Well, sometimes. I mean, it would really depend. And with all due respect to people at ICBC Rehab, I worked with some really great people. But sometimes there just wasn't provision for that kind of service. So, for example, I would think of like a young mom who has a young child, and they've sustained a spinal cord injury, some kind of really severe injury.
Right, okay.
And they're at home, and there's no provision under their rehab benefits for childcare.
Okay.
Okay, and or they have a child and 3 dogs or something, and no one can take care of the dogs and no one can take care of the children, but they're allowed certain other very narrow provisions, like they were allowed to have a certain amount of home care.
So when you would go to ICBC and say this patient really does need some additional help, there would be no provision for it, and they'd say too bad, essentially.
Exactly.
So then the individual client's lawyer
can step in.
A Scott Stanley type person would take over from you and say, look, ICBC, this patient really does need this, and you'd better find a way to accommodate that. That's what you do, Scott, don't you?
Yeah, that's sort of where the lawyers fill the gaps.
Right.
And that's that's a big part of what we do. I mean, often with ICBC, there are limits on what they can pay.
Sure.
And I've had countless discussions with ICBC rehab people and ICBC adjusters where they say, look, we know this person needs this, but it's just not something we're allowed to pay for because there just isn't coverage for this under the ICBC policy. Okay. And so you do a little bit of negotiating with the ICBC people to see if you could broaden their interpretation of that coverage. But if not, then you'd look for other sources of funding for that coverage.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that this is your first really encounter with the legal profession, and you see it from a different perspective now. Suddenly the lawyers who are advocating on behalf of some pretty badly injured patients of yours are doing really good work.
Exactly, and really, I think advocating is the best word. They were able to do things that I, as a clinician, just didn't have the resources or the power, the influence to have done. And so I that was kind of my first taste of the legal profession in that context. And then over the years, I had the opportunity to do some medical legal work, so I was able to go to court on numerous occasions and provide testimony to the court directly.
Okay.
And I just found that some of my colleagues, some of the other therapists I knew, some of the physicians that I know, were really reluctant to go to court. They were really intimidated by it. They found it to be a very stressful situation. I, for some reason, was quite drawn to it, and I really quite enjoyed going to court, and found that having that opportunity to speak directly to the judge and to explain this person's unique story and their situation and why this individual needs X, Y, and Z, and why it's important for their life and for their independence. I just felt that was so powerful, and I really say I gravitated to that. So that was kind of the beginnings for me of thinking, oh, maybe the legal profession might be right for me.
Well, it's a great story, and we're not done yet, but I wanted to interrupt only to point out to our listeners that the theme of today's program is all about becoming a lawyer, access to justice. Scott, there is a paucity, a dearth of lawyers coming up. Hard to believe, but and of course you know all the lawyer jokes better than most of us, but is it true that there is a shortage of lawyers? Where, in Canada or just here in BC?
There's a shortage of lawyers in BC for sure, and I think it would be fair to say there's a shortage of lawyers across Canada. And when you're at a dinner party and you say there's a shortage of lawyers, people just laugh at you.
Yeah,
but,
well, I'm sure.
Someone took Shakespeare to heart. They killed too many of them,
Yeah,
I guess.
right, of course.
People will readily accept we have a shortage of doctors and surgeons and nurses, but there really is a shortage of lawyers, and it really is we're really at a critical point where it has been affecting access to justice for many years. I'd say the last 10 to 15, and we're really trending in the wrong direction. And unless we can bring more lawyers online, we're going to continue to see an erosion of people's access to justice.
Interesting stuff. Now, Diana, back to you're still in the Okanagan. You're still an occupational therapist. You're getting turned on by the court system, and you're recognizing the incredibly good, positive contribution some lawyers make, especially with regards to personal injury law. When you decided to cross the threshold and perhaps jump into the legal profession, was it personal injury law that you wanted to practice specifically?
I think there was a couple of areas that really interested me. One was personal injury. I did also some work with a few firms on medical malpractice cases, and those also tend to be quite complex situations. And I'm kind of drawn to complexity. I really love learning and finding out about new conditions and unique situations. So those were areas I really was drawn to. The other area was somewhat related to some human rights law, because I also have done a lot of work in driver rehabilitation.
Oh, we'll talk about that in a little while too. Okay.
So it was a combination of things, but mainly the personal injury and medical malpractice were particular interest to me.
Okay, now I want to stop and just zoom over to Scott here for a second, because in previous conversations, and you've been a guest here on The Law Show umpteen times, and it's always a pleasure to have you with us. So back us up to your early days when you articled and you became a lawyer. You went out and worked for one of those big corporate firms representing insurance companies, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I mean, I took somewhat a circuitous route to get to where I am now, but everything happens for a reason, right?
Sure.
I mean, when I started off, there were, again, as there is now, a shortage of articling positions and a shortage of jobs. And young guy wanted to get married, so basically I took the job that was offered to me. And it wasn't until I'd done the work for about 13 unlucky years that I realized this just is not going to be sustainable for me long term.
Right.
I just don't enjoy representing insurance companies. I enjoy paying my mortgage and keeping the wolves away from the door. But
that's right, yeah.
I just wasn't enjoying coming to work anymore.
But it also provided you with a good resume and years of track record and experience, which would set you up for being able to make a choice and go elsewhere.
Well, absolutely. The thing about working at a firm like that is you can do a type of work, for example, insurance coverage and cases like that you really couldn't learn to do properly on your own unless you'd have to work at a firm like that. And so there are a lot of blessings that came with learning to do the work at a firm like that.
Right. And so when you decided to cross the floor and work as an advocate for clients against many of those insurance companies you had previously represented, that was an important and somewhat risky decision, wasn't it?
Well, it's one the wife didn't fully endorse, right? I mean, you don't...
Well, imagine the security of 13 years at a nice firm with a big bank account, and all of a sudden you want to do what?
Well, most people that become partners don't leave their firms.
Ah.
And that's exactly what I did. I was at one firm where I turned down partnership, and then I was at another firm where I actually left the partnership. And what it boiled down to is I just didn't like doing work for insurance companies.
Right.
And, I went to law school, much like I think Diana did, just out of intellectual curiosity, but, this expectation that you were going to help people. And I wasn't helping people. I was probably harming them. And, that's not something that was going to be sustainable for me.
Right. Diana, talk to us, because you're so fresh out of law school, literally days.
Yes.
Talk to us about the process, because you obviously have just completed the process of articling.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
that's a position like an intern in medicine, right?
Correct.
You go and work in a law firm for what period of time?
Well, maybe if I can back you up a little bit, Sterling.
Sure.
I kind of explained from the beginning. I mean, my route to get to law school is a little unusual it was a little delayed.
Yes.
But I think more and more people are coming to law school
as mature students.
As mature students,
yeah.
Sure. With a variety of backgrounds. I met some people at law school with very interesting backgrounds, and they hadn't gone through, the probably more what would have been typical when Scott went through. But usually you need to have an undergrad degree. Many people come to law school with a master's or, an undergrad degree with, a few years of experience doing something totally different.
Mm-hmm.
You need to write the LSAT exam, which is the law school academic test, I think.
Yep.
And it's scored, and it's a very stressful thing to do. Many people take it. It's a very challenging kind of exam, and
it's kind of an entrance exam.
It is,
okay.
And then that mark is considered along with your grades from university, and then I believe at UBC where I attended, I think they get about 2,500 applicants a year for, I think it's about 170 positions.
Okay.
So it's pretty competitive just to get in the door.
So is it typical then, if you're a real keener and you want to go to law school, that you would apply to several and cross your fingers hoping that at least one of them will say yes?
You do. I was unusual in that I being a mature student, and I had just finished my my master's. I think my family is getting tired of me being at school all the time.
Right.
I said, well, I'm going to just apply to UBC. I'm going to apply once. I'm
Right.
going to throw it in, and if they take me, they take me. If they don't, I guess I'll keep doing OT work. So fortunately, they took me. But typically, students would apply to many different schools.
Right.
And then kind of see where they get in.
Exactly. So now, how many years in law school before you get to article?
Right.
Even?
So once you're accepted, then it's 3 years full time.
Okay.
And then after you graduate, you have your degree. Some people never go on to practice law. They may go into other things,
Right,
business or working for the government, that kind of thing. But if you choose to that you want to become a lawyer, you still have to go through a 1-year process that's administered through the Law Society, and that's the articling period.
And that's the legal equivalent of the medical intern, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
And so long hours, terrible dollars, and tons of experience.
Correct.
Is that, because that's certainly the way the medical types will recount their interning days. Is articling the same thing?
I would say it depends somewhat on the firm that you're at. I mean, I'm really fortunate with the firm that I went to that I think the hours have been really quite reasonable, and we're not on a a billable hour system.
Right.
So I think, colleagues, friends of mine who have been articling at the same time as me, some of them have gone to some of the large firms where it's based on a billable hour.
Right.
So they need to be productive and bring in a certain amount of money into the firm, so that places some inherent pressure on them.
Right. Well, Scott, that was the drill when you started with that corporate firm that you came out of law school and articled with. You were under pressure to deliver some new clients, weren't you?
No, not actually. When I articled, and this just shows you how long ago it was that I articled, Sterling. It was almost 20 years ago. That's the way it should have been, and that's part of the problem we have now. When I articled, there was no financial pressure whatsoever.
Oh, lucky you.
They basically said, "Look, we'd like you to just don't worry about making us any money. You don't have any targets, no dollar targets, no hour targets.
Wow.
We want you just to become the best possible lawyer you can, learn as much as you can." And that's traditionally how articling programs were run, and I think that's how they should be run.
It's a learning process, right?
Right, but the thing is, our articling students and the whole programs are so expensive that lawyers are looking to recover some of those costs. So now a lot of these financial pressures are being visited upon students when they're articling to help recover some of these costs, and that's really, I think, it's affecting the reason why lawyers don't continue once they become lawyers.
Right, and it ripples through the ranks. Even
does.
Diana, when you were saying we had a coffee before the show, that you in law school, students, before even the last year of school rolls around, you're already out there trying to find a place to hang your hat as an articling student.
Yeah, it was something that I had never encountered before in all my years, that you're applying for a job a year before you're actually going to start at that job. And if you're not successful in getting that job in the summer before your last year, it can be really demoralizing. And I know some fellow students who hadn't obtained articles going into their last year of law school, and it was really stressful for them.
I'll bet it was, yeah. Need to take a quick break here. Our guests on The Law Show from Murphy Batista LLP in Vancouver personal injury law firm are Scott Stanley and Diana Robertson, freshly minted personal injury lawyer with Murphy Batista, who has our congratulations on this first day of June. And we'll be back with tons more right after this.
This is AM 650's The Law Show. There's more of the show still ahead.